Quip, makers of the Quip electric toothbrush, make good habits simple with the new brush head, floss refill, and toothpaste delivered every 3 months. Sets start at $25. Get your first refill free at getquip.com/auto. That's getquip.com/auto.
Welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today for a two-man show from Columbus, Ohio, Consumer Editor Jeremy Korzeniewski. How's it going, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good. We're in a bit of a snow mode here. It's a snow day across Metro Detroit. We're getting anywhere from 3 to 6 inches. So, yeah, it's kind of nice, actually. Kind of peaceful. Good day to do a podcast in a window with a view of Woodward. It's kind of nice.
I'm just far south enough from Detroit that we don't get the snow that you guys get often. We've got like some big, huge snowflakes that are falling right now, like the big puffy stuff, but I don't think like, we might get a dusting, but it won't be anything significant.
Cool. So let's jump right into the show. We got a great one for you today. Jeremy and I have spent a lot of time in Cadillacs. So I just got out of the Xt6, like literally. It's, a very important 3-row crossover for Cadillac. It's, I have a lot of different thoughts on it. Some of them conflicting. It's definitely an interesting vehicle, that's for sure. And, Jeremy, you were in the CT5-V first drive, which is pretty important. You also drove just the regular CT5, is that right?
Yeah, so there's going to be 3 engine options in the CT. Well, I guess let's step back a minute. You could say 4 engine options that we know of will be coming because there's 2 versions of the 3-liter twin-turbo V6. They're very close in horsepower. One of them just breathes a little bit more freely than the other, the one in the CT5V. So I did not get a chance to drive the 4-cylinder. Which is a 2-liter turbo. That will be the base engine. I did get to drive the 2 versions of the 3-liter twin turbo, the one in the premium luxury and then the one in the V, which makes a little bit more horsepower, like 35 extra horsepower, the same 405 pound-feet of torque in either configuration. So, I mean, there's other things that make the CT5V a little different than the regular CT5 with the 3-liter. But as far as the engine goes, there's not much difference between the two.
Cool. So that's our drive section, a couple of Cadillacs that we'll slice up. And then in the news section, Subaru is boosting power and potentially boosting power in the STI, maybe to 400. That's according to some reports from this week. We're also hearing down the line, the Crosstrek might get a little bit of a power boost. And finally, it's the end of the line for the Chevy Impala. By the time you're listening to this, the last one may have rolled off the line. So let's jump right in. Cadillac, I think it's a brand that always is a bit of a lightning rod for us. They have a lot of history. They've had some very interesting cars recently, sort of like bond burners, if you will, with some of the V series, the sedans. They've really made cars that are fun to drive and intense for enthusiasts. They're also getting more into the crossover game, which we'll talk about a little bit. I'll get into that here. But Jeremy, why don't you take us through just the CT5V? What are your impressions of it? It's sort of like the spotlight car of what you went out there and drove. Just after a day of driving, what was your quick gut reaction? What was your verdict?
So my verdict is that it's a really good car that I wished was not badged with a V. And the reason I say that is because Cadillac, I feel like you could point to a lot of missteps that Cadillac has made over the years, even in the last decade. The V series Cadillacs are not one of those missteps. They've done an excellent job, and Greg, feel free to disagree with me here if you think I'm off base here, but Cadillac has done an excellent job of establishing the V badge as ultimate performance, fully capable of competing with AMG, the best from AMG, the best from BMW M. And I don't think that segmenting the V series is necessarily a bad thing, but it's just really bad optics to go from a 640 horsepower CTS-V to the first CT5-V badged car debuting with 360-ish horsepower. That's not a good look. It would have made a heck of a lot more sense, to me at least, to hold on a V badge CT5 until they've got the full fat supercharged V8, whatever it's going to be, 600 whatever horsepower, like super sedan, make a big wave with that, and then branch down into lower level V cars. Now, we've talked to Cadillac about this at length. They wanted to get away from the V Sport series, which is kind of what they were doing as a mid-tier. So you could actually make the argument that this is not even a new strategy for Cadillac. They've had a mid-tier V series in the past. They just called it V Sport, as opposed to the just Dash V that was the highest end thing. The V Sport models that they sold didn't quite hit the target and weren't particularly successful with customers, but that doesn't mean that the V Sport moniker itself was bad. And I think they would have gotten a lot less pushback, and it wouldn't be so much a talking point if they would have just released a CT5V Sport, and then said the CT5V is coming soon. Instead, they got rid of V Sport, made the CT5V, which is what you'd expect to be the top of the line performance model, a mid-tier, and they say, don't worry, something else is coming. Whatever, it's a strategy. They've got smarter marketing people than me, but judging by the internet chatter, judging by all the stories that I've read from not just Autoblog, but other journalists, comments on our site and other sites, people are just confounded and confused by this strategy. The other thing about this CT5V that I find a little off-putting is that it uses a 3-liter twin-turbo engine that is just barely different from the same 3-liter twin-turbo engine that you can get in a non-V badged car. Past V Sport models like the CTS-V was, I don't know, what was it, 420 horsepower, I think, something like that, with a bigger, more powerful engine. Again, I think there would have been a little bit less confusion, a little less pushback if they had gone something at that power level. Just brought back that CTS V Sport engine in the CT5V instead of a barely warmed over version of what you can get in a premium luxury model. Okay, so that's kind of the I'm confused by this commentary. Getting to the actual car, the way that it drives, the way that it's priced, its options and whatnot, it's actually really good. It's based on General Motors Alpha platform, and if you've been an enthusiast driver for a long time, you're familiar with this Alpha platform. The previous Cadillac ATS and CTS both rode on the Alpha. The current Chevy Camaro rides on the Alpha, and the new CT4, which isn't on sale yet, and the CT5 that I just drove, both are built on these Alpha guts. Okay, it's really good. It's a super stiff chassis. Everything that GM makes on the Alpha platform handles really well. It rides really well. The hard points are really good. The style is a little bit more sedate than what you have come to see from Cadillac in past years, but it fits with other Cadillacs that are currently for sale, like the Xt6 that we're going to talk about. They're derived from this Escala concept that we had seen a few years back. It looks good, a little bit less distinctive. It runs the risk of blending in a little bit more than past Cadillacs, for better or for worse. But I guess what I would say in conclusion is this. If you're interested in the CT5 or CT5V, take it for a test drive. It drives really, really well. You're not going to be disappointed in the overall sports sedan package. My caution would be that if you're expecting just ridiculous hair-raising, tire-burning performance out of the CT5V, you're gonna have to reset your expectations a little bit. It's a proper sports sedan. It's quick. It's powerful enough, but I guess the subheading that I went with on my first drive report is this might not be the CT5-V that you were expecting. And I think that sums it up pretty well. Just judged on its own merits, and even against competitors like the BMW M340i and the Audi S4, Mercedes C43, it's a good car. It's competitive. The pricing is well aligned to compete in that segment. It's just did they really have to do it this way? Did they make the right decision marketing it in this manner? And that's the question. We'll see.
Yeah, to me, this is one of the sort of multiple things Cadillac's doing that I'm a little confused by, sort of the way they're ordering the V lineup and remarketing it, rebranding it. But I mean, just put all sort of the history of what, we think V means, put that aside, and I'm very excited to drive this car. I think, I've seen a few of them on the roads around here because obviously GM headquarters is, down the street. There's a lot of people driving them already, and they're good looking, I think. I think this sort of, you mentioned the Escala designed or derived appearance. It's a good, updated, contemporary look. It's not as severe as sort of that early 2010s CTS sort of styling with all those angles and lines, but I like it. I mean, and we'll get into this a little bit with the Xt6. It's a very elegant yet sporty look. It's distinctive, and I think the proportions are really nice. It's a beautiful look. One of the pictures that you can see, check out Jeremy's first drive of this on our website, of course. The car has a really nice fastback kind of roofline. So I think that's something that you can tell GM design, I think, is really at a good place, and that they're trying new things. I think they're winning with some of their styling efforts. And, my takeaway, obviously not having driven this, is that it's a really good looking car. So I think in that sense, they're succeeding. And then stay tuned. I don't what does V mean going forward? I get that they're sort of trying to proliferate it and make it, applicable to different vehicles in their lineup. There's M and AMG versions of BMW and Mercedes SUVs. So I get that, Cadillac wants to kind of probably someday have an XT4V or an XT6V. And, you need to sort of realign what V means for this to fit. But, it's that part of the strategy is tough. And I think it's a thing too, where even we start to forget what everything means. V was the real series, if you will, with the supercharged V8s. Then there was V Sport, which was just kind of an awkward thing anyway. So Sport, what is that? It's not sporty. It's not the most performance oriented thing, and I get it. There's only so many ways you can sort of, identify your cars. But yeah, I'm not quite sure how they're going to sort that all out. I think eventually it'll crystallize. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the chassis, though, is really dialed in, is what I'm getting from you, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I alluded a little bit earlier to there's more differences than just the engine. There's more that goes into a sports sedan than just what powers it. The chassis got to be up to snuff, and the CT5's is. It's very, very good. The suspension, it uses the magnetorheological shocks, the ones that are charged with the fluid that can change its damping characteristics on the fly. It does it in 5 milliseconds or something like that. And as it has been the case with past versions of this suspension setup, the one in the CT5, which incidentally is version 4.0, works really well. The car rides extremely, extremely confidently. It's firm but smooth and comfortable. Big bumps don't completely upset the car. It's crying, begging for more power, and Cadillac's going to give it that. That's coming. And I don't want to belabor the point because the name of a car is just the name of a car. You can't judge a vehicle just by what's on the badge. But it's just, Cadillac has done such a good job of making the V Series cars stand out, and it's like one of their, in my mind, as an enthusiast, one of their big success stories. So I just hate to see them dilute that. And like BMW fans would be going crazy if the M340i were badged M3. And if BMW were to say like, oh, don't worry, there's a more powerful, better M3 coming soon, they'd be like, well, this isn't an M3 then. And that's, I think, Cadillac's fans and rabid fan base might not be quite so crazy as it would be with the BMW M. But like that's the same level. Like that's what, like if it had been BMW doing this, they'd be getting just as much flack. So I'm not picking on Cadillac. I just question it. I don't know that it's the best, way that they could go about it. And I just wish that anything with a V badge was significantly different powertrain wise than what you can get in the other cars. And I think that's my biggest complaint is, as far as the engine goes and transmission goes, there's nothing in it between the premium Luxury CT5 and the CT5-V. There's a little bit more horsepower, but simply because, it's got a freer flowing exhaust or something like that, and you can't feel it from behind the wheel. All that power is past 4,500 RPM, all the extra. So in daily driving, like there's nothing that tells you that this powertrain stands out from anything else you can get in a CT5, which, I think that's a demerit. That's kind of a knock on something that's supposed to be a performance car. But again, looking aside from the marketing and the badge that's on the trunk, the car is really good. I really enjoyed driving. I got to take it on a racetrack even. Performed extremely well. It's so balanced. I think, if you're as irritated as I am by the confusion behind the car, but you're still interested, definitely take it for a test drive, but wait until 2021 so that you can get Super Cruise as well, because that is coming next year.
Cool. That was the Autoblog Technology of the Year a couple years back. So yeah, 2019. So let's move along to another Cadillac. This one, I didn't get to track this like you did, but this is the 2020 Xt6 Sport with all-wheel drive. So this is really important vehicle for Cadillac. This is sort of their three-row family hauling crossover. This is something that slots in above like the XT4 and 5, but below, the Escalade. This is an area where Cadillac really needed to fill this gap. They didn't have a big SUV that was something that you could get if you didn't want like a true truck-based SUV like the Escalade. You're seeing BMW, Mercedes, other companies are, really making some hay in the space, and Cadillac, which has a pretty good reputation for big SUVs, really needed to get there. So now they're there. And I spent a weekend driving the Xt6. I enjoyed it. It's bright red. It's creased again with some of that like Escala design elements, like you mentioned there, Jeremy. I'm really liking the new sort of Cadillac design language. I think, design language is evolving. We're getting to a point where maybe like, companies don't do one thing forever. They go like from really brash, like Cadillac was doing, to a little more nuanced. Hyundai was a brand that was really kind of out there, like with the Sonata. Then they toned it down. Now the new one's kind of crazy again. But when I look at, these two vehicles we're discussing, I see a very mature, elegant appearance, and I think that's good. So how does this thing drive? Pretty good. I mean, sort of the verdict around the office is that it drives like a big three-row GM crossover, which I think is true. I also think the Cadillac sort of chassis engineering, you can still sort of feel that just Cadillacs in general, I think, have more of a dialed in tuning versus, Chevys and GMCs. It seems like some of that more sporting DNA does come through, even in a big SUV like this. I thought the steering was, there was a nice weight to it. The chassis it's comfy like you would expect, but it's maybe a little a little bit, more athletic oriented than say an Acadia or a Traverse or something like that. And I mean, part of it might be I'm just kind of, putting those thoughts in my head. But I thought it was a pretty good driver. I mean, for a vehicle this big, it drives pretty well. I've spent time in an Explorer recently, which is obviously a bit of a troop transporter as well with 3 rows. So, I was pretty happy driving this Cadillac. I thought, the interior is solid. We spend a lot of time sort of complaining about GM interiors. I would say this one's mostly good. I think still like the lower parts, sort of like I'd say hip level down, like some of the door wells. Again, you see some of that dark, not great looking plastic, or not plastic, but you know what I mean? That's sort of like hard surface material that tends to crop up in GM SUVs. But the dashboard's very nice. There's some, right like the side where you would like maybe rest your arm while putting it out the window. There's some soft leather with some stitching that looks and feels pretty good. There's some nice wood-like accents in there. It's a good-looking vehicle. I was in the X7, the BMW X7, not all that long ago, and I would put this right around that level. I think as far as just like somewhat decent, good to good interiors, they're both in that sort of about the same level. They both have, I think, interesting exterior design, and I would kind of put them about the same level. So didn't do anything crazy with this thing, drove my son around, his car seat fit back there fine. We just kind of drove it around town. It's a very nice SUV.
Yeah, I talked with Michael Simcoe. He's the head of GM design I talked to him at the CT5 event in California. And, he's definitely, he knows what he's doing when it comes to Cadillac design. All their cars are, following the same design path, the Scala-esque design. It's very attractive, and I think before if you think that they're maybe a little bit boring, or as you said, Greg, a little bit less out there than what Cadillac was doing on the art and science design ethos that they had for so long, with the very crisp, harsh lines. Wait till you see it in person. And I don't know if this is a good idea at your local dealership. They might get mad at you, but if you get a chance, put your hands on the car. Run your hands along, the hood lines, the fender lines, maybe the back pillars, the C pillars, or if it's an SUV, maybe a D pillar or what have you. But actually run your fingers across it, and you'll see that there's a lot of surface detail that doesn't really come through in photos very well. I think that's true on the CT5 that I just drove. I think it's true on the Xt6 that Greg was driving, is talking about. And that kind of surface detailing is really gonna it's gonna look cool in different forms of lighting. As the sun goes across, as shade hits it, especially in like dark colors with maybe some metallics in them. There's a lot of detail in there that your eye just doesn't see in photographs. I think that there's some missteps. For instance, the CT5's C-pillar has got this weird black plastic cover kind of on it. And you could say, well, they had to do something with that. And so this is what they did. But take a look at the Honda Civic next to a CT5. It's got also kind of an arcing fastback look to it, just the regular current Honda Civic sedan. And you'll see, instead of a black plastic piece, they put a piece of glass in. And I think it's a more refined look. And I think maybe Cadillac would have been a little bit better off going with that, just putting a piece of glass in that C-pillar spot instead of kind of pinching it with black plastic. And the Xt6 is the same. It's not perfect, but they are identifiable. It's a Cadillac when it goes by, and it's a little bit less off-putting to the mainstream buyer than the old very harsh design that they got trapped into for a while.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I think they tried that super aggressive play with the styling and then some of the dynamics and the powertrain setups, and it just didn't get them the results they needed. So I think this is a different approach, and we'll see where it takes them. But let's move along to the news section. We've got some reports out of Subaru that I think are both kind of interesting. The STI, this is the 2021 WRX Sti for full SEO knowledge, I guess, if you will. Reports say it could pack 400 horsepower, which would be the most powerful Subaru that's ever sold in America. Check out the full story written by our new associate editor, Byron Hurd. That's on Autoblog, of course. And I don't know. I mean, I guess here's the big question when we kind of jump through this news section. It's kind of like, obviously, check out the stories, got all the facts for you, but when you try to distill them and boil them down, like, what's the takeaway from here? For me, it's like, do you think the STI needs 400 horsepower, Jeremy?
That's a funny question. No, it doesn't. The STI S209 that came out in 2019 is an absolute riot, and that's 341 horsepower. It's the STI and WRX in general is a relatively light car. You put the 6-speed stick, the all-wheel drive drivetrain in there, and it's a very, very quick, fast car. To get those speeds, you gotta, admittedly abuse it, rev it up, drop the clutch, count on that all-wheel drive traction to scoot you to 60. But they've proven very durable over the years too. But does it need 400 horsepower? No, not really. But we're living in a day and age where, a V6 Camry is over 300 horsepower. 300 horsepower is not that headline-grabbing number that it used to be in mid-2000s when the WRX was really making a reputation for itself. I think 400 horsepower is a logical bogey to aim for the next STI. Maybe something in the 350 range for the standard WRX would make sense, 340, 350, something like that. Everything's getting more powerful, and to just kind of be able to compete with other vehicles that are aimed at that enthusiast market, they might need to hit that 400 horsepower number just to stay relevant.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that assessment. We've both driven a lot of WRXs, WRX STIs. I honestly don't think the car needs 400 horsepower. I think when you factor in all the other elements of what makes an STI, 400 horsepower almost is a little too severe. I've driven these things in a variety of situations, and they're a bit challenging to drive. Wouldn't you say, Jeremy?
Well, challenging. If it's one of your first high-performance vehicles, it could be a little bit intimidating, sure.
I would say, I guess I have this image of driving one back from Chicago, and I was stuck in traffic on 94. So, man, just that clutch and the manual, it was a lot, man. It was like you're bumper to bumper trying to get on the Dan Ryan or whatever that expressway was. And I was like, geez. So a little more horsepower there was not what I was looking for. So yeah, I think it's definitely a fun car to drive, and I certainly appreciate its merits. But to kind of look at it the other way, from a marketing perspective, it is a little tough in this day and age where, like, every car, it seems like, that has even remotely performance chops has like at least 350 horsepower, it seems like. So, I could see where Subaru might want to circle that number and be able to write it, in big red letters and say, hey, 400, definitely would sell magazines and get us website clicks.
Yeah. And I think especially for an STI, you were talking about the daily driving of a WRX when you're stuck in traffic and all that. There's two flavors of WRX. There's the regular version that maybe that one doesn't need to be quite so extreme. They've got some like premium trims in that, even where they're leather lined, and it's not exactly a luxury car, but it's not the crazy rally racer that it kind of grew up on. The STI, maybe that's the one that they push and make a little bit more extreme. And if someone buys the one with the STI badge, they kind of know what they're getting into. So yeah, I think you're onto something, Greg. Maybe dial back the regular WRX a little bit and make that it's still a performance car, but it's not a beat you up performance car. Whereas the STI is the full bore, hair on fire. I don't care what it's like to drive in the expressway or daily driving duties or how tough the clutch is or whatever, the throttle response. I'm buying that on purpose. Maybe that's the one that they tweak the horsepower on and put as much turbo pressure as possible in a 4-cylinder engine.
So speaking of 4-cylinders, kind of an awkward transition, the Crosstrek might be getting a more powerful 4-cylinder. This is interesting to me because I think the Crosstrek it's definitely a good volume seller for Subaru. A couple guys here in the office actually own Crosstreks. So it just, right now it comes in at, 152 horsepower. And that's kind of slow, if you will, even for a relatively small vehicle. So we're seeing reports that it might bump up to about 182 horsepower using, different engine. And I think that would kind of get it exactly where it kind of needs to be as far as like the modern power we expect in our vehicles today. 182 horsepower is not that much power either, but I think it would make it a little bit more, a little more compelling, a little bit more of a better daily driver is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I remember doing, we're talking about the Crosstrek specifically, but everyone remember the Crosstrek is an Impreza with body cladding and a little bit more ground clearance. So, I mean, this, I assume, would make its way down to the Impreza line as well. Anyway, I remember doing the initial first drive on the current Impreza and writing a very glowing report on it. But that was based on its chassis. My one big complaint that I dinged the Impreza on was the lack of power. And there's, leave that as a base engine, that's fine. Make a bigger, more powerful option for the people who want to pay for it. The best thing about the Impreza and Crosstrek is Subaru's, I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head right now, but their most recent platform that underpins pretty much all of their models now. And I assume the new WRX and STI will be based on this as well. The platform is excellent. It's super stiff, it's solid. It handles really, really well, rides really, really well. Big complaint, not enough power. And when I was reading this report, Tom Dole, the CEO of Subaru America, said, quote, one of the things that our customers were telling us about the Crosstrek was maybe it was a little underpowered with the 2-liter engine. Well, the 2.5-liter engine will solve that problem. Spot on. That's exactly what I would say. Don't don't do anything crazy. Just use the regular 2.5, 182 horsepower, 176 pound-feet in a Crosstrek or Impreza. Spot on. That's exactly what you should put in it.
Sounds good. So I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
But let's roll forward to our final news item, the end of the line for the Chevy Impala. They actually built that right here in Detroit, to the Detroit Hamtramck plant, which manages to straddle 2 different cities. It's a big factory. They also made the CT6 there. It's in a variety of other things. But this Friday, the 28th, is the final day for the Impala. I think, I don't know. I feel like naturally this Impala is probably at the end of its life cycle. I think just based on sales volumes and consumer trends that it's a logical move for General Motors, for Chevy to, sunset this. That being said, I mean, I feel like at some point they're going to have to go back to, I just feel like in general, you're going to see a shift maybe back to sedans in some form. And I feel like in some form, the Impala name will be back. So I feel like this is sort of like, so long, but maybe not farewell, if you will. I think, we might just see it. We'll see, I think in some form, we'll see sedans and the Impala back, whether it's actually an Impala sedan or the Impala name gets put on something else, which I think is not a bad move either. It's one of their stronger names. Why not use it? I think this is sort of like a pause, and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, it could be. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Greg, but I don't think Chevy has gone on record as saying what might come next or what might come in the future. But I don't think that the current Malibu or current Impala, while good cars, I don't think that those are the vehicles that we're like kind of fretting over and saying like, oh man, I hate to see those go. It's not the car so much as the names and the all the baggage that's attached to those names. And I mean baggage in a good way. All the way back to the 1960s and 1970s Malibu and Impala were big time stuff. Like that's what Chevy's history is based on. So I think you're spot on. Good chance those names will come back in the future. Hopefully next time around on something more than just a mainstream family car. That the best thing you can say about it is that it's cheap and it rides really well. And not that those aren't good things. I wouldn't begrudge anyone for buying an Impala. They're great deals and tons of room, tons of space. Excellent family car. But I mean, wouldn't it be cool if Chevrolet brought back, Malibu, Impala, maybe even throwing an SS badge on them at some point in the future for something that's actually aimed at the performance crowd that really appreciates what Malibu and Impala mean from back in the day? I think that'd be a great play.
I think for a second here to take a step back, I think the Impala, the current car, I think is decent. It's been ages since I drove one. I couldn't even tell you the last time I drove one. I know I worked at Autoblog when I drove one, and the time that sticks out is literally 2014 because we had a huge flood. And I remember I parked the Impala in the garage of my house to protect it from the rising floodwaters, if you will. And I would think I've driven one since then, but my recollections were good, though. It was, I thought the styling was pretty good. They did a nice job of, giving it a little bit of extra sort of, design panache, if you will, versus, some of the other large sedans out there. You could see some of that heritage look, I guess, if you wanted to, in the wheel arches and, of course, the badges. So, and I don't think you just buy an Impala just to buy one. I think you're probably a big sedan Chevy fan who's had Impalas before, and that's probably why you would buy that. So, yeah, the current product got old. It's hard to say exactly how competitive it really was. If you're listening to this, though, check out a piece that we're going to run on Friday in line with the sort of end of production, written by one of our freelancers, Ronan Glan, who drove it actually in Canada not too long ago. So he's got kind of a more contemporary verdict on it. My verdict was basically the Taurus was another front wheel, all-wheel sort of large sedan, the Nissan Maxima. I don't know, take your pick, which one you want. They all had their strengths. They all had their weaknesses. They were all relatively old at various points in their life cycle. I don't think there was one Autoblog editor's pick in that group where you're yeah, that's the one to get. I would put the Charger and the 300 in a different category because they're rear wheel drive and they're actually they're old cars, but FCA keeps updating them. So I wouldn't even put them in this sort of almost dreadnought, status with, this ghost fleet of segment of big cars that still exists. So, I mean, that's a long way of saying, I don't think from a product perspective we'll miss it. I think from the great heritage, the great, tradition that goes along with names like Impala, I think, it's nice to know the car exists. Let me put it that way. I think the next move is come up with a good electric vehicle, probably a crossover, but at least make it a styled up one, make it interesting, and slap the Impala name on that. That would be my path forward for this venerable name.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad play. I think they'd get less flack for that than Ford calling the Mach-E a Mustang. So why the heck not? Make it cool, give it a nod to the history of it. But yeah, it's too good of a name, it's too recognizable of a name for them to completely let it let it die after this. And I think too, that segment in general that it plays in, I'd have to look, but what do you think the best seller is? Probably the Avalon. The Toyota Avalon would probably be the segment leader.
I would guess, not having looked at the segment, but yeah, probably. And the Avalon's among the better cars in the segment, I guess. So, I mean, I like the last Avalon I drove. Let's put it that way. It's a TRD Avalon.
Yeah.
So, that's its own kind of, side dish.
I don't think there's a huge market for large American style. I mean, the Avalon I know is from a Japanese car company, but it's definitely tailored to American taste. Just large family sedans. There's not a big segment of the marketplace anymore. So, I don't think people are gonna freak out about the Impala vehicle, the segment disappearing, because people just aren't really buying them. They're all buying crossovers instead, for better or for worse. So yeah, modernizing Impala on a new platform electric vehicle, like you said, probably a crossover, something like that, a large one. That would be something I could see them doing. But we'll see. I mean, hey, maybe this will be the very last Impala to roll off a production line. It could happen.
I will say this. I do think my sort of theory of an electrified, styled up crossover, I think there's more room for growth there versus taking sort of the old Chevy SS path. I agree with you that I think the market for large family, American or Japanese sedans is just not there. I don't really even know who buys the Avalon other than Lyft drivers and Uber drivers. People who use them for sort of almost sedans that need a big back seat. So yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Another car I actually drove probably more recently than the Impala was the SS. And it was a lot of fun. I think there is a bit of a market for that. But again, that market is even smaller than I think the Camaro's market. If you talk about old school, just enthusiast things that we like, I still think there's always going to be a place for Mustangs, Camaros, Challengers, things like that. When you start to say, well, okay, so you want a sports car coupe, okay. Sports sedan from a mainstream brand, I don't know. I'm not really sure who's buying that these days. I think you start to, you're kind of looking at a segment that, maybe is just kind of colored in the gauzy pages of history.
Yeah, and it's it's something that makes the Charger such an interesting vehicle. It's riding on guts that have been around for a really long time. I mean, if the Charger were old enough, were a human to be old enough to drink right now, the platform. But FCA deserves credit for making that car relevant for as long as it has been. And I think one of the reasons it is relevant and has stayed that way is the sheer breadth of ground that they cover with it. It's everything from a family car to a 200 horsepower or 200 mile an hour, ridiculously overpowered muscle car. And I think the fact that they're offering so many different guises of this traditional American segment is one of the reasons why it's still a thing. And there's going to be a Charger next year and probably the year after that. Whereas the idea of just we're selling these as inexpensive large family cars, it's just an idea that it's just not a segment that people are buying anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's why we get to frankly, Chevy ending production of the Impala is about as much traffic as the Impala has probably gotten from us, in years. So, yeah, I guess we'll leave it there. Good show, Jeremy. What just random question? What beer is on your tap list recently?
So, I've actually been drinking some local beers lately. There's a few local breweries right around where I live. If anyone is listening and lives in the Columbus area, I'm actually in Delaware, and I've been drinking some of the local brews here. The Stas Brewery is my favorite that's here, but then there's also Old Dog Brewery and Restoration Brewery right here in Delaware, Ohio. And I've been filling my growlers up, and some really good, interesting things happening at just the local breweries in every town, neighborhood that are popping up everywhere in the States. What about you, Greg?
Generally, I've just been kind of, bouncing around the different breweries, but I've been into pale ales lately. Kind of something, a little bit of a haze, slightly cloudy, but not too hoppy. Something maybe below an IPA level. Just to drink with a pizza, that sort of thing.
No, yeah, so, I've been drinking what they're referring to as a brute IPA. Have you tried that style? Yeah, it's a little bit less hoppy than I don't know if readers knew that they were going to get beer podcasts along with Auto Talk, but I think there's some crossover there, so this is probably fine. But yeah, brewed IPAs are like a little bit less hoppy and a little bit drier, not real juicy, and it's a style that I've really been enjoying in the kind of colder weather. I typically drink stouts and porters and nut browns and that kind of thing in winter weather, but when I want to get that little bit of a hop fix, I've been drinking brewed IPAs.
Sounds good. Well, in case you've noticed there, listeners, we actually didn't have a Spend My Money this week, but we just kind of dropped in a beer advice segment. So, yeah, it's cold out there. It's maybe snowing wherever you are. Have a drink. So I guess we'll just leave it there. Good show there, Jeremy. We'll talk to you soon. We'll talk to the rest of you soon here on the next episode of the Autoblog Podcast. Thanks for listening this week. Be safe out there. Until next time.